They laughed at Earth right before human children started dying. Inside the shining hall of the Galactic Council, that cruel laughter rolled like thunder. Great banners floated under the high crystal ceiling. Huge screens showed the power of the Galactic Empire, rows of warships, giant carriers, heavy destroyers, and black battlecruisers moving in perfect lines across the stars. It was a show of force, and everyone in the chamber understood the message. The Empire ruled through fear. And on that day, Earth was the target of their mockery. The human delegation stood in silence near the center floor. Ambassador Ju wore a dark formal uniform and held herself with quiet control. Beside her stood Commander Yuna, Officer Sora, and Captain Ju. None of them moved, none of them answered the whispers around them. To the powerful races of the galaxy, humans were still small, young, divided, too emotional, too soft, a species known more for trade ships, science vessels, and colony transports than for war. Then Grand Admiral Varric stepped forward. His armor shone like polished steel, and his voice cut through the chamber. He pointed toward the human crest and smiled without warmth. "Humans speak proudly," he said, "but where are their war fleets? Where are their dreadnoughts? Where are the ships that can survive a real galactic war?" Laughter exploded through the hall. Some nobles leaned back in their seats, amused. Some envoys nodded in agreement. They had watched Earth for years and seen only cargo lines, patrol ships, and civilian expansion. No giant armadas, no battle groups, no visible military strength worth fearing. That was why the Empire had grown careless. They believed that what they could see was all humanity had. Ambassador Ju finally answered, her voice calm and clear. "Earth has asked for peace many times. We have threatened no one." Varric's smile only widened. "Peace," he said, "is the favorite word of weak worlds." The chamber laughed again. Yuna's hands tightened behind her back. Sora lowered her eyes to hide her anger. Captain Ju stayed completely still. They had trained for moments like this. Take the insult, show nothing, let the galaxy keep believing the lie. Far from that grand chamber, on the edge of human space, Haven 12 floated quietly around a pale moon. It was a mining colony, small but full of life. Warm lights glowed inside its steel domes. Workers returned home after long shifts. Children ran through safe little corridors. Families cooked dinner, thinking tomorrow would come like any other day. Engineer Day was walking back from the market with a bag of warm bread in one hand. His sister Nari walked beside him, and her little son Juan held onto her coat, half asleep. Above them, defense satellites tracked normal traffic. Then everything changed. Hidden behind the moon's dark side, Imperial strike ships slipped out a silent drive. Their hulls were black. Their weapons were already opening. On the bridge of the lead cruiser, Admiral Taryn looked down at Haven 12 with cold eyes. "To all ships," he said, "begin the lesson." The first plasma strike hit the outer shield towers. White fire exploded across the colony. Alarms screamed, lights turned red. The station shook so hard that Day dropped the bread and grabbed Juan into his arms. Nari stumbled beside him as the ceiling cracked and dust rained down like gray snow. Over the emergency speakers, a frightened voice shouted for civilians to run to shelter zones. But the Empire had not come to occupy Haven 12. They had come to make an example. And as the first colony dome burst open into the freezing dark, Ambassador Ju's wrist display lit up with one urgent message: Haven 12 is under attack. The council was still laughing until Ju decided every person in that chamber would see exactly what the Empire had done. Ambassador Ju did not speak right away. For one long second, she stared at the glowing words on her wrist display while the last pieces of laughter still drifted through the Galactic Council chamber. Then her thumb moved once across the screen. A secure channel opened. Live footage flooded in, shaking images, broken signals, smoke, fire, screaming civilians. Yuna saw the change in Ju's eyes first. Sora saw it next. Captain Ju did not move at all, but his jaw hardened. Ju lifted her hand, and without asking permission, she projected the emergency feed into the center of the chamber. The laughter died instantly. Haven 12 appeared above the council floor in terrible detail. Burning corridors, crying children, rescue crews crushed under falling steel, a mother dragging her injured daughter through smoke. Then a wider shot showed the colony ring torn open, its bright lights failing one by one as pieces of metal and glass drifted into space. No one in the chamber spoke. Even those who feared the Empire had not expected this. Not here, not so openly. Ju let the images play. She made them watch every second. She made them hear the alarms. She made them see what their silence had allowed. Then the image shifted to exterior footage. Imperial ships circled the colony like hunters around wounded prey. Their markings were clear. Their firing patterns were organized. This was not a mistake. This was not an accident. It was a planned strike on civilians. A murmur spread through the chamber. Several delegates looked away. Others stared at Varric in disbelief. But Grand Admiral Varric did not look ashamed. He looked bored. He folded his hands behind his back and stared at the destruction as if he were reviewing a weather report. "Unregistered expansion has consequences," he said coldly. "Human settlements crossed into zones of imperial concern. Corrections were necessary." The room went colder than space. Yuna almost stepped forward, but Ju lifted one finger and stopped her. Varric turned his gaze back toward the human delegation. His voice became even crueler. "If Earth truly has warships worth naming, this would be the moment to use them." That was the thing that unsettled the chamber most. The humans still did not shout. They did not beg. They did not threaten. Their silence changed shape. It was no longer the silence of humiliation. It was the silence before something broke. At last, Ju closed the feed. The image vanished, but the horror stayed in the room. She looked across the chamber, not only at Varric, but at every delegate, every noble, every envoy who had laughed a moment earlier. "The Galactic Council has now witnessed an unprovoked attack on human civilians," she said. Her voice was calm, but it carried like a blade. "History will remember who mocked us before the slaughter and who chose comfort after seeing it." No one answered her. No one dared. Ju turned and began walking toward the great chamber doors. Yuna, Sora, and Ju followed at once. Guards near the exit stepped aside without being told. Then Varric's voice came from behind them, sharp with contempt. "You should be grateful that the Empire has not yet turned its attention toward Earth itself." Ju stopped for half a second, but she did not turn around. When the doors sealed behind the human delegation, the sound echoed through the corridor like the closing of a tomb. Only then did Yuna speak. "Will the council act?" she asked, her voice shaking with fury. Ju kept walking. "No," she said quietly. "They already decided." She opened a secure channel to Earth Command. Deep under mountains, under oceans, and under cities, hidden systems woke in silence. And somewhere far below Earth's surface, Admiral Kong received the call. As Haven 12 burned and the galaxy looked away, Earth's oldest hidden command was about to hear the words it had feared for generations. Open black priority. Admiral Kong received the call in a room that almost no one on Earth knew existed.
The chamber was buried deep under rock, steel, and layers of old security systems built across generations. There were no windows, no flags, no decoration. Only dark walls, quiet screens, and the low hum of machines that had waited for a day like this. When Ju's secure transmission arrived, every person in the room turned toward the main display. Haven 12 appeared in broken, shaking images. Fire moved through the colony corridors. Pressure doors failed. Bodies floated through torn sections of the ring. Emergency crews ran toward the damage, only to vanish in new explosions. In one frame, a child pounded on a sealed door while smoke filled the hall behind him. In another, a rescue shuttle lifted off and was destroyed before it cleared the docking lane. No one in the room said a word. Captain Haru stood near the command table, his face pale and hard. Commander Bora stared at the screen without blinking. Analyst Un lowered his eyes for one painful second, then forced himself to look back up. Admiral Kong remained still. Age had bent nothing in him. His gray hair was short. A scar ran across his cheek like an old memory that had never truly healed. He watched every second of the attack, and when the feed finally paused, the room felt colder. "Confirmed?" he asked. Un checked the signal chain with shaking fingers. "Confirmed, sir. Imperial Navy signatures on every major ship. Attack pattern is deliberate. Civilian structures targeted first." Haru let out a slow breath. They wanted this scene. "Yes," Kong said. They wanted a lesson. Another message appeared on the side screen. Casualty estimates were still unstable. Colony stability had dropped below survival thresholds. Rescue chances were falling by the minute. Bora's voice was low. "What about the Council?" Ju answered through the secure link. Her face appeared on a smaller display, calm but drained. They saw the feed. They did nothing. For a moment, no one moved. Then Kong stepped toward the central console. It was older than everything around it. Dark metal, no bright markings, no public name, only a faded symbol pressed into its surface. Earth surrounded by a ring of stars. A symbol from the first years after contact, back when humanity had smiled, reached outward, and learned too quickly that peace without strength was only a pause before someone stronger arrived. Kong placed his hand on the console. "Record this," he said. Un straightened. "Recording." Kong's voice did not rise, but every word landed with weight. "The Empire has crossed the threshold. Civilian slaughter has been carried out openly and with intent. The Council has witnessed the crime and refused action. By authority of Unified Defense Command, we now initiate Black Priority." The room answered at once. Screens changed color. Old locks disengaged. Encrypted systems, untouched for years, came online in chain after chain. Far above them, satellites shifted their positions. Buried relays woke beneath deserts and oceans. Hidden shipyards received codes wrapped in forgotten layers of security. Around the world, people who had spent their lives preparing in silence looked up as the call finally reached them. Captain Haru swallowed hard. So it's real. Kong looked at the growing network of awakened systems. It was always real. We just prayed we would die before needing it. Then a final panel lit up on the central console. Authorization required. Kong pressed his hand flat against the black glass. The machine accepted him. His voice was steady when he gave the order. "Open the black vault." And somewhere far beyond every public map, in the darkness around a dead star, sleeping giants began to wake. In the hidden graveyard of a dead star system, the first secret human warship was turning toward open space. In the hidden graveyard of a dead star system,
The first secret human warship turned toward open space. For years, that forgotten region had been nothing but silence, cold metal, and drifting dust. Broken rock circled a dim, dead star. Old wreck fields floated like bones in the dark. No trade route passed nearby. No explorer stayed long. It was the kind of place the galaxy ignored. That was exactly why humanity had chosen it. One by one, lights came alive across the vast shipyard. At first, they were only tiny sparks in the black. Then full power lines lit up along giant docking arms, sealed hangars, and hidden support stations carved into hollow asteroids. Massive doors began to open. Frozen systems warmed. Ancient machines started moving again with slow, heavy purpose. And in the middle of that sleeping steel kingdom, a colossal warship woke from silence. Its hull was dark and broad, built for endurance, not beauty. Long lines of armored plating covered its sides. Shield towers unfolded like sharp wings. Engine vents opened in layers. Along its body, sealed weapon ports came to life one after another. On the side of the ship, faint under the rising power glow, stood three letters the galaxy had never seen in open war. HWS, Human Warship. On the bridge of that giant vessel, Admiral Kong stood beneath low blue light as systems came online around him. The flagship was called the Resolute. It had never entered a public registry. No alien spy had ever photographed it. No council archive had ever mentioned it. Even on Earth, almost no one outside the deepest defense circles knew it existed. Captain Haru moved from station to station, checking readiness as crews settled into places they had trained for all their lives. Commander Bora reviewed shield bands and strike formation channels. Oan stood over tactical maps, watching hidden fleet markers light up one after another across the dead system. Each new signal meant another ship was awake, then another, then 10 more. Stealth cruisers slid free from deep hangars built inside the rock. Heavy destroyers powered up from silent docks. Drone carriers unfolded launch bays. Massive dreadnoughts, larger than most Imperial command ships, began turning slowly in the dark. The void filled with metal. The old fleet was not dead. It had only been waiting. A young tactical officer near Oan whispered without meaning to, "How many?" Oan stared at the growing count and answered softly, "More than the Empire ever imagined, more than the Council would ever have believed." Kong heard him, but said nothing. His eyes were on the main display. The fleet map spread wider every minute. Hidden yards around the system were opening in sequence. Supply ships rose from masked storage docks. Support craft activated repair webs. Long-range artillery vessels rolled into formation with patient precision. Even the small escort ships moved with purpose, every one of them placed according to plans written decades earlier. Plans made for the day peace failed. Haru stopped beside Kong. Power checks green across the flagship. Main batteries are charging. Cloak grid ready. Jump drive stabilizing. Bora looked up from her station. Outer formations report combat readiness. Drone reserves are above projected numbers. We can move as soon as you give the word. Kong remained silent for a moment. He was not admiring the fleet. He was remembering the people who had built it. Generations of engineers who worked in hidden yards and never spoke of their labor. Pilots trained in secret under false assignments. Families who gave sons, daughters, years and lives to a defense plan they hoped would never be used. Politicians who smiled in public while protecting budgets buried so deep that enemies saw only harmless civilian growth. Whole lines of human history that had accepted being underestimated because the lie kept the fleet alive. Now the lie was over. A new signal entered the bridge.
Survivor count from Haven 12. Too low. For the first time since the call, something dark moved behind Kong's calm expression. Mark every confirmed civilian loss, he said. Oan hesitated. Sir? Every name, Kong replied. No one disappears into a number. Oan nodded and turned back to his console. Across the bridge, the crew grew even quieter. This was no longer only activation, it was grief with engines. The last sealed docking wall in the central yard opened like a wound in the dark, and 3 enormous command carriers emerged together. Their hulls carried the Earth insignia, worn but proud, and the sight of them changed the bridge air completely. Even trained officers straightened at once. Bora exhaled slowly. If the Empire sees this formation all at once, they won't understand it, Haru said. Kong finally spoke. They don't need to understand it. They only need to realize, too late, what they touched. The Resolute's main engines began to glow. Then came the fleet acknowledgement wave. Ship after ship transmitted readiness across the secure Black Vault network. Weapons aligned, shields rising, strike groups formed, cloak screens calibrated, jump corridors plotted. Humanity's hidden answer to every insult, every threat, every future massacre was now breathing in the dark, and the fleet was ready to move. As the final command keys spread across the hidden Armada, Admiral Kong prepared to send humanity's first war order into the stars. As the final command keys spread across the hidden Armada, Admiral Kong prepared to send humanity's first war order into the stars. The bridge of the Resolute had gone so quiet that even the smallest sound seemed sharp. The soft hum of power systems, the steady pulse of shield cores, the low clicking of tactical stations locking into fleet sync. Thousands of people across hundreds of hidden ships were waiting for one voice. Kong stood at the center command ring, his hands behind his back, his face hard as stone. Before him, the fleet map stretched across the main display. Blue symbols marked human vessels. They filled the dead system in layered formations, attack groups, support lines, stealth wings, drone carriers, artillery platforms, med ships, and escort grids. For decades, they had existed only in sealed files, old oaths, and silent training rooms. Now they were real, awake, and armed. Captain Haru looked up from his station. All strike groups report ready. Commander Bora followed at once. Jump calculations complete, stealth corridors stable, outer pickets confirm no hostile detection yet. Un's fingers moved across his console as fresh signals rolled in. Black Vault communications synchronized across all fleet layers, reserve nodes online, no internal failures. Kong gave a slow nod. Then a new image appeared in the lower corner of the tactical display. Haven 12. Not the first feed, a later one. The colony was worse now. The outer ring had broken apart. Fire still crawled through spinning fragments. Rescue beacons flashed weakly in the dark, like tiny hearts refusing to stop. A civilian transport drifted near the shattered docking arm, half melted, half open to space. No one on the bridge looked away. For a second, Haru closed his eyes. Bora's hands tightened on the edge of her console. And Kong, who had kept his voice steady through everything, said only one sentence. They burned families to send a message. No one answered because there was nothing to add. He stepped closer to the fleet channel. Open command-wide broadcast. A tone moved across the bridge, then across the fleet, then across every hidden ship in the Black Vault network. Microphones opened. Crew members paused at weapons stations, engine controls, drone bays, flight decks, shield pits, and surgical rooms. Pilots looked up inside fighter canopies. Engineers stopped with tools in hand. Marines in sealed launch holds stood straight. On every human ship, people listened. Kong's voice carried across them all.
For many years, he said, the galaxy believed Earth was weak. They saw our patience and called it fear. They saw our silence and called it surrender. They saw our restraint and called it emptiness. He let the words settle. Today, Haven 12 burns because the Empire believed those lies. The bridge stayed still. The fleet listened. We did not build this force for conquest. We did not hide it for pride. We built it because history taught us a simple truth. Peace means nothing if it cannot be defended. On a destroyer deep in the third formation line, young crew members stood with tears in their eyes. On a carrier flight deck, pilots lowered their heads. In an artillery ship near the outer dock ring, an old engineer touched the earth patch on her sleeve. Kong continued. The Council watched civilians die and chose comfort over courage. The Empire struck children and called it order. So hear me now, all hands across the Black Vault. The waiting is over. The lie is over. The dead of Haven 12 will not be abandoned to silence. His final words landed like iron. We move. At once, the hidden Armada changed. Formation lights shifted, internal locks released. Massive engines rose from idle into controlled burn. Dock clamps disengaged with deep metallic force. Across the dead star system, ships that had slept in darkness began turning toward their assigned vectors. The Resolute moved first. Its engines glowed pale glue, then brighter, pushing the flagship slowly out from the central yard. Around it, escort cruisers slid into place. Dreadnoughts rotated into heavy assault alignment. Stealth frigates drifted ahead like shadows. Drone carriers opened inner launch racks, their mechanical arms unfolding like steel wings. Bora studied the sequence as it unfolded. Primary battle groups are clean. No collisions, no lag in formation response. Haru allowed himself one tight breath. They trained for this their whole lives. Yes, Kong said, and now they finally know why. A soft alert sounded at Un's station. He turned quickly. Sir, we're receiving first-range enemy scout chatter from outside known human borders. Imperial watch posts are picking up movement echoes. Haru glanced at the display. Can they identify us? Not yet, only anomalies. They think it might be drift, sensor ghosts, or pirate mass shadows. Bora's mouth hardened. Good, let them guess. Kong looked at the jump map spreading before him. The routes had been planned years ago and updated in silence over and over again. Every line represented risk. Every destination represented blood. Haru, he said, first wave? Stealth recon groups forward, strike elements behind, carriers hold until opening position, heavy guns arrive last, just before reveal. Do it. Orders flashed across the network. The first human ships entered junk, not in one loud swarm, but in disciplined layers. Small stealth vessels vanished first, slipping into dark corridors between systems. Then came recon frigates, electronic warfare platforms, and hidden drone relays. After them, the bigger ships followed in measured patterns, each departure timed so perfectly it looked almost graceful. The dead system began to empty, not with panic, with purpose. The Resolute held position a moment longer while final support units reported green status. On screen, ship after ship disappeared into controlled jump streams, carrying the weight of generations with them. Then the main deck doors opened. Flight crews wheeled the first fighters into launch tubes. Sirens pulsed once across the carrier bands, and Un's console lit up again. Imperial scouts just got a visual on one outer signature. Haru looked up. Reaction? Un swallowed. Confusion first, then alarm. Kong's face did not change. Let them be afraid. Then he placed one hand on the command rail and gave the next order. Flagship jump. Bring the fleet into human space. The stars ahead folded into darkness, and the Resolute entered the war. Minutes later, the first Imperial scout transmitted a shaking report that no one in the Empire was ready to hear. Human warships, hundreds of them.
Minutes later, the first Imperial scout transmitted a shaking report that no one in the Empire was ready to hear. Human warships, hundreds of them. The message reached the nearest Imperial command relay in broken bursts, full of static and fear. At first, the officers who received it thought the scout had lost sensor balance inside a radiation pocket. Then the second report came, then the third. Different ships, different angles, same impossible claim. A large human fleet had appeared near the outer human systems. Not trade ships, not colony escorts, warships, real warships. In the command center of the Imperial forward line, alarm tones began to rise one after another. Officers rushed between stations, screens lit up with fresh contacts. Red symbols multiplied across the tactical map so quickly that one junior analyst froze with his hand above the console. A captain shouted him to move. He still did not move, because the map made no sense. Human signatures were spreading through key jump lanes with impossible speed and clean discipline. Scout groups had already taken observation positions. Electronic interference began touching Imperial sensor webs. Long-range pickets lost contact, then reappeared only long enough to send short, confused bursts before going dark. At the center of that chaos stood Grand Admiral Terran. He was the Empire's forward commander in the outer lanes, a man known for crushing frontier rebellions before they had names. But now, even he looked uncertain as he stared at the display. "Magnify Outer Sector 4, he ordered. The main screen shifted. There they were, dark shapes gliding out of jump shadow. A line of sleek human cruisers moved first, their hulls long and sharp, shield bands glowing in controlled blue rings. Behind them came larger ships, heavy destroyers, armored carriers, drone platforms, and then something bigger than the room expected, a dreadnought. Then another, then another. Imperial officers fell silent. The ships did not drift in disorder like a rushed defense. They moved in layered formation, each one placed with exact purpose. Their spacing was precise. Their vector changes were smooth. Their support wings protected blind angles before any order was spoken. Even from distance, the pattern was obvious. This fleet had not been assembled in panic. It had been built for war. Terran stepped closer to the display, anger trying to hold back the fear rising inside him. "How long have those ships existed?" he demanded. No one answered. No one knew. Another officer turned from her console. "Sir, multiple human formations are anchoring around choke points. They're not just responding, they're taking position." A colder truth followed that. They were not defending, they were controlling. Far away on the bridge of the Resolute, Owen watched the Imperial channels through filtered intercepts. His display translated panic into organized lines of intelligence. Haru stood beside him, arms folded, eyes fixed on the tactical spread. "They've seen enough now," Owen said quietly. "No more confusion. Their forward command understands this is a fleet action." Bora nodded from weapons control. "Good. Confusion helps for a minute. Fear helps for much longer." Kong remained at the center station, studying the broader map. Human ships were dropping into assigned sectors exactly as planned. The first stealth units had already tagged Imperial relays. Drone fog was spreading through selected corridors. Support lines remained hidden behind false signature shadows. Every movement was designed to create pressure before the first main strike. He looked at the nearest red cluster. "Terran will try to gather his broken wings and hit our front line hard," Kong said. "He'll believe we're overextended because that is what he would do." Haru glanced toward him, "And when he moves, we cut the arm he reaches with." Orders moved across the fleet. Heavy artillery ships adjusted angle. Carrier groups slowed to controlled release speed. Stealth frigates widened their spread. On the Imperial side, Terran finally forced his voice back into command shape. "All nearby groups converge. Full weapons readiness.
I want those human ships identified, counted, and pressured before they spread further. An officer turned pale as more signals arrived. Sir, they're already beyond the first spread. Terran snapped toward him. What? The humans predicted our relay pattern. They're sitting on the routes we need to regroup. For one terrible moment, the whole command center understood what that meant. The humans had not just revealed a hidden fleet, they had studied Imperial habits for years. Terran clenched his fists behind his back. Signaled the Citadel. The Citadel meant Varric. The message shot through protected channels at once. In the central Imperial core, far from the frontier, Emperor Varric was still reviewing council reactions when the first priority alert interrupted his chamber. He listened with visible irritation as Terran's report began. That irritation vanished by the 10th second. By the time the tactical images reached him, his face had gone still. Human ships filled the projection space, rows of them, classes no public record had ever listed, weapon signatures stronger than expected, formations tighter than some Imperial elite wings. Varric stared as if the image itself had insulted him. This is deception, he said, but the officer beside him did not sound certain. Multiple source confirmation, my Emperor. Varric's eyes narrowed. Where did they come from? No one could answer that either. Back in the frontier, the distance between the fleets was falling. Imperial ships rushed to form a defensive line, but they were late. Their spacing was uneven. Some units arrived too fast. Others drifted out of sync after relay jamming hit their channels. They were still trying to decide what humanity was when humanity had already decided what to do with them. On the Resolute, Bora watched the enemy attempt order inside growing panic. They're building the line crooked, she said. Haru's mouth tightened, because they still think the line is the battle. Kong looked once at the final Haven 12 casualty marker, still glowing in a corner of his private display. Then he raised his head. Open broad combat channel, he said. The bridge obeyed. Across the fleet, human crews went quiet again. Kong's voice moved over every ship. Enemy contact confirmed. Remember Haven 12. Hold formation. No wasted fire. No empty anger. Let discipline speak for the dead. Pilots straightened in their harnesses. Gunners placed hands over live controls. Engineers watched power lines hold steady under rising demand. Medical teams locked down trauma bays. Boarding units checked seals in total silence. Then Own spoke, eyes on the range clock. Imperial forward batteries entering engagement distance in 30 seconds. Kong did not blink. Then let them be the first to understand. The stars between the two fleets seemed to tighten, and in the Imperial Command Center, Grand Admiral Terran realized with growing horror that the humans were not slowing down. They were coming forward with the cold confidence of a force that had waited years for exactly this moment. When the first shot finally crossed the dark, the Empire expected a desperate defense, but what came instead looked like a perfectly planned execution. When the first shot finally crossed the dark, the Empire expected a desperate defense, but what came instead looked like a perfectly planned execution. The opening blast came from the Imperial side. A heavy plasma beam tore across the void, bright and violent, aimed straight at the front edge of the human formation. In any other battle, that first strike would have forced the enemy to scatter, break shape, or answer in panic. The human fleet did none of those things. The beam hit empty space. A second before impact, the targeted ships had already shifted position with smooth, almost impossible timing. Their line bent without breaking. Shield shadows overlapped. Support craft slid into cover lanes. It was not a dodge made from fear. It was a movement practiced long before the Empire even knew these ships existed. On the bridge of the Resolute, no one celebrated. Captain Haru watched the tactical display with sharp focus. Enemy committed early, he said. Commander Bora answered at once and exposed their center. Kong gave a single nod. Begin Phase 1. The order moved through the fleet like a current. At once, the front human cruisers split apart in measured lines, opening space that had seemed closed only seconds earlier. From behind them, long-range artillery ships revealed themselves and fired together. The dark lit up. 3 coordinated volleys crossed the void in perfect sequence. Not random blasts, not a wall of noise. Each shot had a target, a purpose, and a timing window designed to break the Imperial line before it could fully settle. The first volley struck shield generators. The second cut through command relays. The third hit propulsion clusters on the larger cruisers trying to hold the center. Imperial ships shuddered. 2 exploded almost instantly. Another spun out of formation with half its engine section gone. A command frigate lost its forward shields and vanished in white fire before its crew could even send a clean distress call. On Terran's command deck, officers shouted over one another. "Center line damaged. Relay loss on wings 3 and 4. Human artillery is firing through our coordination band." Terran slammed a hand onto the command rail. "Reform the line. Push the left flank forward." But even as he gave the order, new red warnings flashed across his display. The human left flank was not holding still. It was moving around him. Stealth frigates that Imperial sensors had only half-tracked suddenly appeared on the edges of the battle space. Drone clouds burst from hidden launch bays and spread like black storms through the gaps in Imperial formation. Small, fast, and coordinated, they rushed sensor arrays, turret mounts, and exposed communication nodes with terrifying speed. A young Imperial officer stared in disbelief. "They're inside our firing lanes." On the Resolute, Owen read incoming data faster than most people could speak. Drone impact successful, outer sensor rings failing, enemy target lock quality dropping. "Carrier groups?" Kong asked. Haru answered, "Ready. Launch them." Across the human fleet, carrier bay doors opened. Waves of fighters shot into the dark. They came out in clean attack layers, not rushing blindly forward, but entering exact paths between artillery fire and drone swarms. Their engines burned cold blue. Their wings flashed through shield glare. Each squadron knew where to go before the enemy even understood the shape of the battle. Imperial gunners tried to track them and failed. Too fast, too many angles, too much interference. The fighters hit in silence first, cutting shield seams, blinding external sensors, slicing along weapon mounts. Then the heavier strike craft followed, releasing tight bursts into damaged armor points the artillery had already weakened. The result was brutal. An Imperial battlecruiser lost its starboard guns, then its engines, then broke apart near the center line. 2 destroyers collided while trying to avoid incoming strike wings. A command frigate lost its forward shields and vanished in white fire before its crew could even send a clean distress call. On Terran's command deck, officers shouted over one another. "Center line damaged. Relay loss on wings 3 and 4. Human artillery is firing through our coordination band." Karen slammed a hand onto the command rail. "Reform the line. Push the left flank forward." But even as he gave the order, new red warnings flashed across his display. The human left flank was not holding still. It was moving around him. Stealth frigates that Imperial sensors had only half-tracked suddenly appeared on the edges of the battle space. Drone clouds burst from hidden launch bays and spread like black storms through the gaps in Imperial formation. Small, fast, and coordinated, they rushed sensor arrays, turret mounts, and exposed communication nodes with terrifying speed. A young Imperial officer stared in disbelief. "They're inside our firing lanes." On the Resolute, Owen read incoming data faster than most people could speak. Drone impact successful, outer sensor rings failing, enemy target lock quality dropping. "Carrier groups?" Kong asked. Haru answered, "Ready. Launch them." Across the human fleet, carrier bay doors opened. Waves of fighters shot into the dark. They came out in clean attack layers, not rushing blindly forward, but entering exact paths between artillery fire and drone swarms. Their engines burned cold blue. Their wings flashed through shield glare. Each squadron knew where to go before the enemy even understood the shape of the battle. Imperial gunners tried to track them and failed. Too fast, too many angles, too much interference. The fighters hit in silence first, cutting shield seams, blinding external sensors, slicing along weapon mounts. Then the heavier strike craft followed, releasing tight bursts into damaged armor points the artillery had already weakened. The result was brutal. An Imperial battlecruiser lost its starboard guns, then its engines, then broke apart near the center line. Two destroyers collided while trying to avoid incoming strike wings. A command frigate lost its forward shields and vanished in white fire before its crew could even send a clean distress call. On Terran's command deck, officers shouted over one another. Center line damaged. Relay loss on wings 3 and 4. Human artillery is firing through our coordination band. Karen slammed a hand onto the command rail, reformed the line, pushed the left flank forward. But even as he gave the order, new red warnings flashed across his display. The Huma left flank was not holding still. It was moving around him. Stealth frigates that Imperial sensors had only half-tracked suddenly appeared on the edges of the battle space. Drone clouds burst from hidden launch bays and spread like black storms through the gaps in Imperial formation. Small, fast, and coordinated, they rushed sensor arrays, turret mounts, and exposed communication nodes with terrifying speed. A young Imperial officer stared in disbelief. "They're inside our firing lanes." On the Resolute, Own read incoming data faster than most people could speak. Drone impact successful, outer sensor rings failing, enemy target lock quality dropping. "Carrier groups?" Kong asked. Haru answered, "Ready. Launch them." Across the human fleet, carrier bay doors opened. Waves of fighters shot into the dark. They came out in clean attack layers, not rushing blindly forward, but entering exact paths between artillery fire and drone swarms. Their engines burned cold blue. Their wings flashed through shield glare. Each squadron knew where to go before the enemy even understood the shape of the battle. Imperial gunners tried to track them and failed. Too fast, too many angles, too much interference. The fighters hit in silence first, cutting shield seams, blinding external sensors, slicing along weapon mounts. Then the heavier strike craft followed, releasing tight bursts into damaged armor points the artillery had already weakened. The result was brutal. An Imperial battlecruiser lost its starboard guns, then its engines, then broke apart near the center line. Two destroyers collided while trying to avoid incoming strike wings. A command frigate lost its forward shields and vanished in white fire before its crew could even send a clean distress call. On Terran's command deck, officers shouted over one another. "Center line damaged. Relay loss on wings 3 and 4. Human artillery is firing through our coordination band." Karen slammed a hand onto the command rail, reformed the line, pushed the left flank forward. But even as he gave the order, new red warnings flashed across his display. The human left flank was not holding still. It was moving around him. Stealth frigates that Imperial sensors had only half-tracked suddenly appeared on the edges of the battle space. Drone clouds burst from hidden launch bays and spread like black storms through the gaps in Imperial formation. Small, fast, and coordinated, they rushed sensor arrays, turret mounts, and exposed communication nodes with terrifying speed. A young Imperial officer stared in disbelief. "They're inside our firing lanes." On the Resolute, Own read incoming data faster than most people could speak. Drone impact successful.
As the human warships closed the trap, Grand Admiral Terran realized the terrifying truth. This was not a battle Earth was trying to survive, but one it had already planned to win. The tactical display in the Imperial Command Center no longer looked like a battle map. It looked like damage spreading through glass. Red markers flickered, broke formation, and vanished one by one. Whole sections of Terran's front had lost contact. Others still answered, but their signals came late, weak, or full of panic. Commands were being sent, but fewer ships were in position to obey them. The line that was supposed to hold the human fleet had turned into separate pockets of confusion, and the humans were making it worse on purpose. "Right wing, move in and seal the center gap," Terran shouted. One officer hesitated before answering. "Sir, the right wing is under drone interference. Their nav systems are unstable." "Then send manual override." "They already tried, sir." Terran turned to the main screen. That was when he saw it clearly. The human fleet had divided his forces, almost without seeming to move. A wedge of fast destroyers and stealth escorts had cut through the middle of his formation. Heavy human ships held the pressure from the front, while smaller strike elements slipped around the sides and locked down the retreat paths. It was not a charge. It was a clean separation. One half of the Imperial force was now isolated. The other half could see it happening. On the bridge of the Resolute, Commander Bora tracked the split in real time. Her eyes moved across shield data, weapons arcs, and motion prediction streams. "Division is holding," she said. "Enemy support ships on the trapped side have lost cross-cover." Captain Haru looked almost grim, not pleased. "They're exposed." Kong's voice was steady. "Then finish the break before they understand how deep it is." Orders moved through the human fleet. The outer destroyer pairs widened the cut. Long-range artillery changed angle and struck the few Imperial ships still trying to reconnect the broken line. Fighter wings dipped through the opening in fast waves, hitting engines, sensor towers, and command nodes. Drone clusters swarmed damaged hulls and forced defensive gunners to waste fire on dozens of small threats, while heavier human ships lined up their next shots. The isolated Imperial side began to fold inward on itself. One cruiser attempted to turn broadside and return full fire. 3 human strikes hit it almost at once, first the shields, then the spine, then the reactor vent. It burst apart in a flash so bright it washed the nearby ships in white. Another vessel tried to run. It made it 7 seconds. A human frigate marked its jump bloom, fed the vector to a destroyer group, and a tight missile spread cut through the cruiser's engines before its drive could stabilize. The ship rolled helplessly, trailing flame and debris. On every Imperial screen, the same terrible pattern was becoming impossible to deny. The humans did not attack the loudest target. They attacked the most important one. Relay ships vanished. Targeting ships lost power. Shield support nodes were hit seconds before the main strike landed. Every move stripped away one more layer of Imperial control. Terran felt the battle slipping through his hands like water. "Signal all remaining units," he said. "Fall back to secondary formation, defensive shell, pull everything toward the flagship." A communications officer looked back, fear openly visible now. "Sir, some of them can't—" Terran's face darkened. "Can't what?" "Can't reach us." The sentence hit harder than any weapons report, because that meant the enemy had not only broken his formation, they had broken his command. On the Resolute, Owoon intercepted fragments of Imperial traffic flooding the void. Med requests, damage screams, emergency command loops, ships asking for orders from a flagship that could no longer reach them cleanly. He swallowed and looked toward Kong. "They're starting to lose internal trust," he said. "Some ships are following old formation logic. Others are acting alone." Kong did not surprised. That happens when power depends on fear, and fear stops working. Haru folded his arms tighter as he studied the separated enemy block. "Terran's trying to pull the survivors into a shell around his position," Bora answered. "He'll sacrifice the trapped side if he thinks it buys him time." Kong's expression turned colder.
Then we make sure the trapped side knows it. He gave a new order. Open targeted broadband to isolated Imperial units. Owoon blinked once. Message content? Kong did not hesitate. Transmit this. Your command has abandoned you. Power down and surrender, or remain in place and be destroyed. Across the void, the message hit broken Imperial channels. On damaged cruisers and burning escort ships, frightened officers heard the human broadcast cut through the noise. Some cursed it, some rejected it, some went silent, and some, for the first time in their service to the Empire, looked at their command displays and realized the humans might be telling the truth. One support destroyer powered down its outer guns, then another. A third tried to surrender and was accidentally struck by stray Imperial fire from a panicked ship behind it. That changed everything. The trapped formation, already cracking, began to shake apart from inside. On Terran's bridge, voices rose again. They're surrendering. Who gave them permission to power down? Human message traffic is spreading through the damaged net. Terran slammed both hands onto the rail so hard that the metal rang. Cut the frequencies. Reassert command. Any ship that surrenders without order is to be marked as traitor. But even as he said it, he knew the words were too late. Fear had changed direction. The trapped half no longer feared Earth more than it feared being left to die. And that was fatal. Bora watched the tactical map bloom with tiny changes, ships slowing, drifting, going dark, or turning out of line. Their trapped side is collapsing without coordination now. Haru's eyes narrowed. Terran just lost them. Kong gave the next order softly. Advance containment groups. Disable where possible. Destroy nothing unless engaged. That one choice changed the feel of the human fleet at once. It was still devastating, still relentless, but now there was control inside the Fury. Human ships moved into the broken zone with shielded boarding craft behind them. Fighters shifted from kill angles to suppression runs. Artillery reduced intensity and focused only on ships still firing. Drone clusters tagged damaged hulls with bright recognition markers so no one would strike them by mistake. The Empire had expected rage. What it was seeing instead was discipline so complete it was almost frightening. Far away in the council chamber, delayed battle feeds continued to spread. Delegates watched human ships trap, shatter, and then sort the battlefield with cold precision. It did not look like blind revenge. It looked like a civilization that had prepared for this moment in detail. One counselor whispered, "They are fighting like they have done this in simulations for generations." Another answered, barely audible, "Maybe they have." Back in the battle zone, the surviving free side of Terran's force finally managed to pull into partial defensive alignment around his flagship. But now that formation looked smaller, thinner, less certain, and in front of it, the human fleet was already turning. The trap behind them was closed. The wounded side was contained. Now the rest would have to face Earth's full attention. A warning light flashed on Owoon's board. "Sir, Terran's flagship is charging long-range heavy batteries." Haru looked up. "He's going to make one hard strike and try to punch a path out." Kong stared at the enemy command marker glowing in red. "Of course he is. Men like him always mistake noise for strength." He lifted his chin just slightly. "Bring the Resolute forward." The bridge crew looked up at once. That was the moment the battle changed again. Because until now, the human flagship had directed the war from the center. Now, it was going to step into the front of it. As Terran aimed everything at one desperate breakout, the Resolute began moving straight toward the deadliest fire in the system. As Terran aimed everything at one desperate breakout, the Resolute began moving straight toward the deadliest fire in the system. On the Imperial flagship, warning tones rang across every deck as officers rushed to complete firing solutions. Grand Admiral Terran stood at the center of the bridge, breathing hard but keeping his face cold. The battle around him was falling apart, yet one chance still remained. If he could break the human front with a single crushing strike, he might open a narrow path through the chaos and pull part of his fleet to safety. It was a desperate idea, but desperation was all he had left. "Charge every forward battery," Terran ordered. "I want full concentration on the human command ship." One of his officers looked at the tactical display and swallowed. "Sir, the flagship is moving closer." Terran turned sharply. "Closer?" "Yes, sir." The officer enlarged the image. There it was, the Resolute. It was not holding back behind screens of escorts anymore. It was moving through them, pushing toward the forward engagement zone with terrifying calm. Human destroyers shifted aside to make room. Carrier screens adjusted. Drone formations opened lanes, then sealed again behind it. The giant flagship came on like a moving wall. Its armored hull shone under shield light. Its weapon towers were waking in sequence. Every movement said the same thing. Humanity was no longer hiding. On the bridge of the Resolute, no one wasted breath. Captain Hari stood at command navigation, watching every angle of approach. Commander Bora tracked enemy battery buildup. Owen handled incoming threat calculations so quickly, his screen seemed alive. "Enemy flagship is feeding everything into one line," Owen said. "They're preparing a direct punch through our bow shields." Bora studied the numbers. "It will hit hard." Kong remained steady. "Yes." Haru looked toward him. "We can turn off angle and reduce the impact." Kong shook his head once. "No," he said. "If we turn now, Terran will think fear bought him space. We take the strike, then we take his fleet." No one argued, because they understood what this moment meant. The Empire had spent years laughing at ships like this because they had never seen them. Now the first true image of a human flagship would be burned into their history forever. "Shield harmonics?" Kong asked. Bora answered at once. "Front layers reinforced. Secondary bands synced. Impact bleed channels open. Damage control teams?" Haru checked the deck reports. "Ready on all major levels. Guns? Main batteries hot." Kong gave a quiet nod. "Then hold course." Across the battle space, the surviving Imperial ships gathered around Terran's flagship like wounded animals around a last fire. Their line was rough, unstable, and thinner than before, but the heavy guns at the center were real, dangerous, angry, enough to kill if ignored. Terran lifted his hand. Fire. The dark between the fleets exploded. Heavy plasma lances, rail volleys, missile clusters, and focused ion streams tore across the void in one violent burst. It was the kind of strike that had shattered cities and broken station rings. The remaining Imperial crews watched with desperate hope. Then the storm hit the Resolute. The flagship vanished inside white-blue light. Shockwaves rolled across its shields in great circles. The bow flared so brightly that nearby human ships disappeared in glare. One impact slammed into the lower armor band and threw sparks across half the outer hull. Another punched against the upper shield layer and sent feedback warnings racing across bridge stations. The deck trembled. Alarms flashed. Several officers grabbed their rails. Owen's voice rose for the first time. "Primary front shield down 12%, holding. Secondary layers stable." Another strike hit. The ship shuddered harder. A side console burst in sparks, but damage crews were already moving before the fragments hit the floor. Bora did not even look away from her display. "Shield bleed channels are working. Forward armor took surface scoring only." Harum stared at the main screen through the fading glare. The Resolute was still coming. Not drifting, not turning, coming. On the Imperial flagship, silence spread like poison. Terran's officers looked at their displays in disbelief. One of them whispered, "It survived." Terran's jaw tightened. Reload, reload now. But the moment had already slipped, because the Empire had just thrown its hardest blow at Earth's hidden giant, and Earth had kept moving. On the Resolute, Kong placed one hand on the command rail. Now, he said. The human flagship answered. Its forward batteries opened with controlled thunder. Heavy beams slashed through the dark, not as one wild discharge, but as layered precision strikes. The first attacks cut into the escort line around Terran's position. 2 Imperial ships lost shields and split apart seconds later. The next volley struck a cruiser trying to cover the flagship's left side, tearing away its weapon spine. Then the Resolute's main spinal cannon charged. The whole bridge felt it before they heard it. Power rolled through the ship in one deep mechanical pulse. Light gathered along the long central channel of the flagship, like a star being forced into shape. Owen looked up. Primary weapon ready. Kong's voice was quiet. Target the enemy command shield. Terran saw the charge build on his screen. For the first time since the battle began, true fear touched his face. Brace, he shouted. The Resolute fired. A single beam crossed the void. It hit the Imperial shield wall with crushing force. For 1 second, the barrier held. Then the outer layer cracked. Light burst outward in a ring. The second layer buckled. The third shattered completely. Every Imperial screen on the bridge flashed white. Officers were thrown from their feet. Warning sirens screamed from every station. Forward shield collapse. Port batteries offline. Fire on deck 3. Terran grabbed the rail to keep standing. The human flagship had not killed him. It had done something worse. It had stripped him open in front of both fleets. On the Resolute, Bora's eyes stayed locked to the tactical feed. Enemy flagship shield grid broken. Their support ships are reacting late. Haru exhaled slowly. They're exposed. Kong did not smile, then widened the wound. At once, nearby human destroyers surged forward. Fighter wings dipped low under the flagship exchange and raced toward the broken Imperial center. Drone swarms followed, marking weapon scars, damaged vent lines, and open shield seams. Artillery ships in the rear took the new targeting data and fired into the weak points with surgical timing. The Imperial breakout attempt turned into a public unraveling. Ships meant to protect Terran were now trying to protect themselves. One escort turned the wrong way under pressure and blocked fire from its own side. Another lost engines and drifted across the command lane. A support cruiser tried to screen the flagship and took 3 human strikes in under 6 seconds. Terran stared at the collapsing pattern around him and understood the truth at last. The humans had planned not only for victory, they had planned for his choices. Every move he made had already been counted, tested, and answered. On the Resolute, a fresh message arrived from a monitoring station at the rear. Partial survivor identification from Haven 12. A few transport pods, a handful of emergency signals. Not enough. Never enough. Kong looked at the names for one short second, then he lifted his eyes back to the battle. Signal all units, Kong said. Owen opened the channel. Kong's voice spread across the fleet. The enemy flagship is open. Stay disciplined. End this layer cleanly. Haven 12 is watching. Across human ships, those words hit harder than any siren. Pilots tightened their grip on controls. Gunners corrected aim with colder hands. Boarding crews sealed their helmets. Med teams stood ready for the wounded to come. The fleet moved again, every part of it pressing with the same terrible calm. And ahead of them, the proud heart of the Imperial line was beginning to break. With his shield shattered and his fleet collapsing around him, Terran faced the moment he had feared most. The humans were coming for his flagship itself.
With his shield shattered and his fleet collapsing around him, Terran faced the moment he had feared most. The humans were coming for his flagship itself. The bridge of the Imperial command ship was no longer a place of control. It was a place of alarms, smoke, and rising panic. Sparks fell from damaged ceiling panels. Warning lights flashed red across every screen. Officers shouted damage reports over one another, while emergency crews ran through the rear access corridors. The great command vessel of the Empire, once a symbol of unquestioned power, now shook under every new impact, like a wounded beast trying to stay on its feet. Grand Admiral Terran gripped the command rail so tightly that his knuckles had turned pale. "Report," he snapped. A communications officer looked up, blood running from a cut above one eye. "Outer escorts are breaking formation, sir. 2 have been destroyed. 1 is surrendering. The rest are trying to pull back. Then force them back into line. They're not responding to Central Command, because Central Command no longer meant safety." That truth sat over the bridge like poison. On the main display, human ships pushed forward through the broken space around the flagship. They did not rush like raiders smelling blood. They came in layers, fighters first, slicing through damaged defense angles, then destroyers keeping perfect spacing, then heavier ships behind them, ready to crush anything that tried to hold the gap. And at the center of it all, the Resolute kept coming. Terran stared at that giant human warship with growing hatred. It was too calm, too steady, too certain. Nothing about it looked lucky. Nothing about it looked rushed. It looked like the weapon of a species that had spent years preparing for the exact second when someone powerful would finally go too far. "Ready forward torpedoes," Terran ordered, "all of them. I want saturation fire at the lead destroyers. Keep that corridor closed." An officer hesitated. "Sir, if we release all remaining torpedoes now, we'll empty our reserve racks." Terran turned on him. "If the humans board this ship, reserves will not matter." That silenced the bridge. On the Resolute, Owen tracked the motion of the Imperial flagship and narrowed his eyes. "They're loading a full spread," he said. "Close-range defensive desperation." Captain Haru checked the approach lanes. "They're trying to flood the corridor and force our destroyers off angle." Commander Bora shook her head. Too late for that. Kong stood at the center command ring, watching everything with cold focus. The battle had reached the point where panic could make it ugly. Ugly battles killed careless people. Careless people left children without parents and turned names into memorial walls. He would not let that happen. "Signal forward screen groups," he said. "Break the torpedo cloud before release." Orders moved instantly. The 2 leading human destroyers adjusted course by only a few degrees. That small shift opened precise attack lanes for the frigates behind them. Drone pods launched in glittering bursts. Point defense grids awoke all across the front line. Then the Imperial flagship fired. A wave of torpedoes burst from its forward racks, rushing into the dark in a thick spread meant to force chaos through the human advance. But the human ships did not panic. It had expected this. Defense drones surged forward first, scattering into the path of the torpedoes and feeding live corrections back to the destroyer screen. Point defense guns opened in precise bursts. Bright lines crossed the void. 1 torpedo died, then 5, then 12. Others broke apart under drone impact. A few made it through the first curtain, only to hit overlapping human shield bands that had already moved into position before the Imperial launch even completed. The corridor held. Not cleanly, not quietly, but it held. Haru watched the final blast pattern fade from the display. Minimal disruption. Bora's voice stayed hard. "Their last big bluff is gone." Kong looked at the enemy flagship, then closed the distance. The human ships obeyed. Forward destroyers pressed in tighter. Fighters rolled over the top arc of the Imperial command ship and struck exposed turret mounts. A heavier cruiser to the right of the Resolute fired a clean beam through one of the flagship's damaged side batteries, silencing it in a burst of white sparks. Drone swarms slipped low and tagged hull breaches, shield fractures, and active internal fire zones. On Terran's bridge, officers watched the targeting bloom spread across their ship like a death sentence. "They've marked us for boarding vectors," one of them whispered.
Terran swung toward him. Boarding? Yes, sir. Human breachcraft signatures forming behind their forward line. For the first time, the Admiral's face changed in a way his crew had never seen. The Empire feared many things. Humiliation was one of the worst. To lose a flagship in battle was one shame. To have it taken was something else entirely. No human boot touches this deck. He turned to weapons control. Prepare reactor overload failsafe. The bridge went still. One officer stared at him in horror. Sir, there are still thousands aboard. Terran's answer came like ice. They serve the Empire. That was the moment something broke in more than one person on that bridge. Not from fear of the humans, from the sight of what their own command was willing to do. On the Resolute, Own caught the energy shift at once. Sir, enemy reactor channels are spiking. This could be a failsafe charge. Haru's head snapped toward Kung. Would he kill his own ship? Yes, Kung said quietly, if it denies us the capture. Bora's hands were already moving over her console. We can still stop the chain if we hit the vent control spine. Do it. The human response was immediate. 3 destroyers changed aim at the same time. A fighter wing dipped beneath the flagship's lower arc. Artillery in the rear adjusted by half a fraction. Then all of it struck together. The Imperial flagship jerked hard. One beam punched through a half-open hole seam near the reactor control corridor. Another hit the vent spine running beneath the port side armor. Fighters tore into external relay clusters, blinding internal control from the outside. The overload pattern flickered, then collapsed. On Terran's bridge, the main reactor warning changed from charge cascade to containment failure. Not destruction, disablement. One officer looked up in disbelief. They stopped it. Terran said nothing, because now he understood something even worse than defeat. The humans had not only outgunned him, they had outthought him at every step. They had even planned for his final act of spite. On the Resolute, Own caught the enemy reactor readings flatten. Offer surrender directly to the flagship, he said. Haru glanced at him. After Haven 12? Kung's face hardened, but his voice remained level. We are not the Empire. The message went out across the broken combat channel. Imperial flagship, this is Admiral Kung of Earth Fleet Command. Your reactor is disabled. Your shields are gone. Your fleet is broken. Power down and prepare to be boarded. Further resistance will end in your destruction. For a moment, no answer came, only static. Smoke drifted across Terran's bridge. Broken lights flickered overhead. Some of his officers would not meet his eyes anymore. Others stared at their dead stations, trapped between fear, loyalty, and the sudden weight of survival. Then younger officer, voice shaking, spoke the words no one else dared say. Sir, it's over. Terran turned slowly toward him. His face was full of hatred, but under it, for the first time, there was helplessness. On the main display, human breachcraft had already begun moving forward behind a shielded line. The Resolute loomed behind them like judgment made of metal and fire. Terran stared at that giant human warship with growing hatred. It was too calm, too steady, too certain. Nothing about it looked lucky. Nothing about it looked rushed. It looked like the weapon of a species that had spent years preparing for the exact second when someone powerful would finally go too far. Ready forward torpedoes, Terran ordered. All of them. I want saturation fire at the lead destroyers. Keep that corridor closed. An officer hesitated. Sir, if we release all remaining torpedoes now, we'll empty our reserve racks. Terran turned on him. If the humans board this ship, reserves will not matter. That silenced the bridge. On the Resolute, Own caught the energy shift at once. Sir, enemy reactor channels are spiking. This could be a failsafe charge. Haru's head snapped toward Kung. Would he kill his own ship? Yes, Kung said quietly, if it denies us the capture. Bora's hands were already moving over her console. We can still stop the chain if we hit the vent control spine. Do it. The human response was immediate. 3 destroyers changed aim at the same time. A fighter wing dipped beneath the flagship's lower arc. Artillery in the rear adjusted by half a fraction. Then all of it struck together. The Imperial flagship jerked hard. One beam punched through a half-open hull seam near the reactor control corridor. Another hit the vent spine running beneath the port side armor. Fighters tore into external relay clusters, blinding internal control from the outside. The overload pattern flickered, then collapsed. On Terran's bridge, the main reactor warning changed from charge cascade to containment failure. Not destruction, disablement. One officer looked up in disbelief. They stopped it. Terran said nothing, because now he understood something even worse than defeat. The humans had not only outgunned him, they had outthought him.
As the first human boarding craft touched the Imperial flagship, Terran realized the war had already moved beyond one battle. Earth was now turning its eyes toward the Empire itself. The impact of the boarding clamps echoed through the damaged hull like the sound of fate locking into place. On the outer surface of the Imperial flagship, human breach teams secured their positions with perfect speed. Magnetic boots locked down, cutting tools came alive, shielded entry rigs unfolded against burned armor plates. Behind them, support craft held formation, weapons ready in case anyone on the ship tried one final act of panic. Inside the flagship, corridors shook with every new attachment point. Imperial crew members looked toward sealed bulkheads and heard the metal scream as human entry cutters began their work. Some soldiers raised their weapons with trembling hands. Others lowered them, exhausted and hollow-eyed. Damage smoke still hung in the air. Emergency lights painted the halls in red pulses. The once proud command ship now felt less like a fortress and more like a grave waiting to decide who still belonged to the living. On the bridge, Grand Admiral Terran stood without speaking. No one around him trusted the silence. He stared at the main display where the Resolute remained fixed in position beyond the damaged screens of his escorts. That huge human flagship looked calm even now, as if boarding an enemy command ship in the center of a collapsed battle was simply the next line in a plan written long ago. One officer near Terran finally whispered, "What will they do with us?" No one answered, because no one knew what humans did when they won. That was the part the Empire had never cared to learn. On the Resolute, Admiral Kong watched the boarding feeds arrive one by one. Helmet cams, drone views, internal scans patched through damaged enemy systems. Human Marines moved through breach points in controlled teams, not charging wildly, but advancing with quiet discipline. Shields forward, stun bursts for resistance, lethal force only where fired upon. Captain Haru stood beside Kong, following the operation on a side display. Forward breach secure, engineering route locked, port command corridor taken without major resistance. Commander Bora added, "Weapons decks are going dark sector by sector. Their crew is giving up faster now that they can see we're not slaughtering everyone." Kong said nothing for a moment. His eyes moved briefly to the Haven 12 memorial list growing in the lower corner of his private screen. More names had been confirmed. Families, workers, children. The numbers no longer felt like data. They felt like weight. Owen turned from signals. "Sir, multiple Imperial channels across the sector are requesting status from Terran's flagship. Their command web is breaking down." Kong nodded. "Open a fleet broadcast, full sector range." Haru looked at him. "Public?" "Yes," Kong said. "The Empire wanted this lesson seen." A few seconds later, the human signal burst across every reachable military and civilian Imperial relay in the outer sectors. Damaged ships picked it up. Listening stations picked it up. Retreating escorts picked it up. So did the Council, and soon after, the Imperial Corps. Kong stepped toward the live channel. His voice was calm, but it carried enough force to silence bridges full of frightened officers. "This is Admiral Kong, Earth Fleet Command. Haven 12 was a civilian colony. It was attacked without warning. The Galactic Council saw the evidence and chose inaction. The Imperial strike force responsible has now been defeated. Its command flagship is under human control." Across Imperial space, officers froze as they listened. Some looked at one another in disbelief. Some checked battle feeds again and again, hoping the message was false.
But the visuals were already spreading. Human ships in full formation, Terran's escorts burning, the Imperial flagship disabled and surrounded. Kong continued. Earth did not seek this war. Earth asked for peace and was answered with fire. Let this stand as fact to every world and every throne. Humanity will not beg for the right to protect its own. The message rolled farther out, toward border stations, toward Core Command, toward Varric. On the Imperial flagship, Terran closed his eyes for 1 second, not from regret, from the unbearable truth that the humans had stolen the story itself. This was supposed to be the Empire's warning to the galaxy. Now it was Earth's. A fresh boarding report reached the Resolute. Bridge-adjacent resistance neutralized. Main command route open. Haru exhaled quietly. They're almost at Terran. Kong's face did not change. Take him alive if possible. Bora glanced at him. You want him to stand trial? I want him to answer. The dead deserve that much. Across the Imperial flagship, human Marines advanced through the last secured corridors leading toward the bridge. Their boots struck metal in a steady rhythm. Imperial guards who fired were dropped fast and clean. Those who surrendered were disarmed and moved aside. Every action was controlled. Every corner cleared twice. Every door checked twice. Inside the bridge, panic had turned soft and ugly. Some officers had dropped their sidearms. Some stared blankly at dead consoles. A few stood behind Terran, still waiting for a final impossible order that would somehow restore the old shape of the world. Then the bridge doors blew inward. Smoke rolled. Human Marines entered in tight formation. Weapons down, their lead officer shouted. The bridge is secured. Do not resist. One Imperial guard raised his rifle and was hit with a stun burst so hard he crashed against the wall. Another dropped to his knees at once. 2 more threw their weapons aside. In less than 10 seconds, the bridge belonged to Earth. Terran did not move. The lead Marine stepped toward him carefully, rifle leveled. Grand Admiral Terran, you are under detention by Earth Fleet Command. Terran looked at the human soldier with open hatred. You should kill me now, he said. The Marine answered without emotion. That choice is not yours. On the Resolute, the bridge feed shifted as Terran was restrained, and the Imperial command deck was taken under full human control. Haru watched in silence. Bora lowered her eyes for a second. Then Own immediately started pulling command archives, tactical logs, and secure route maps from the captured systems before anyone could corrupt them. Then a new alarm tone sounded. Own turned sharply. Sir, multiple Imperial channels across the sector are requesting status from Terran's flagship. Their command web is breaking down. Haru's expression darkened. Varric. The signal opened on the main display. Emperor Varric appeared in cold light, seated in the command chamber of the Imperial Citadel. He looked controlled, but only at first glance. His eyes were sharp with fury, and something else sat behind it now. Something new. Caution. He had mocked Earth in public. Now he was looking at Terran's captured bridge through human cameras. For several seconds, neither side spoke. Then Varric said, You have made your point. Kong met his stare without blinking. No, Haven 12 made the point. We are only the reply. Varric's mouth hardened. If you advance further, the Empire will answer with its full strength. Kong's voice stayed level. Then you should have thought of that before you burned children. The silence after that was so sharp, it seemed to cut through the channel. Every officer listening on both sides felt it. For the first time in a long time, someone had spoken to the Empire without fear. Varric leaned forward slightly. What do you want? Kong did not answer at once, because this moment mattered, not only for the battle, for everything after it. When he finally spoke, each word landed with perfect clarity. Immediate withdrawal from every human border zone, recognition of Earth's sovereign defense authority, full surrender of the officers responsible for civilian strikes, reparations for Haven 12 and every damaged colony, and this, understand it well, any attack on human civilians from this day forward will be answered at the source. Even through the signal, Varric's anger could be felt, but he did not interrupt. Because behind Kong, the evidence was visible. The hidden fleet was real. The Empire had bled, And for the first time in generations, force alone was not enough to silence the other side. At last, Varric said, "You speak boldly for a species that has only just stepped into true war." Kong's answer came without hesitation. "No, we stepped into your war. We intend to end it." The channel closed. No threats, no final insult, just silence. On the Resolute, the bridge remained still for a long moment. Then Owen looked up from his console. "Sir, every listening relay in 3 sectors recorded that." Kong nodded once. Good, because now the message had gone beyond fleets and admirals. It had reached the Empire itself, and it could not be taken back. With Terran captured and Varric forced into silence, the human fleet turned toward the next question. Would the Empire choose peace or make Earth come all the way to its throne?
With Terran captured and Varric forced into silence, the human fleet turned toward the next question. Will the Empire choose peace or make Earth come all the way to its throne? For several long minutes, no one in the battle zone moved carelessly. The fires still burned across broken Imperial ships. Rescue lights flashed in the dark. Human carriers held position with their fighters circling in patient rings. Boarding teams secured the captured flagship, deck by deck. Medical craft moved between damaged vessels, taking in wounded humans first, then surrendering enemy crews after them. It was a strange sight. The same fleet that had broken the Empire's power in open battle was now saving lives in the middle of the wreckage. On the bridge of the Resolute, Admiral Kong stood before the main display while the reports came in. The trapped Imperial half had fully collapsed. Several ships had surrendered. Others had been disabled and were now under guard. A few had escaped into deep roots, but not enough to rebuild the line. The battle was over. Captain Haru looked over the latest tactical numbers. No new enemy formations entering range. Commander Bora studied the long-distance channels. Border stations are going quiet. Imperial outer commands are waiting. No one wants to be the next one to test us. Un turned from the signal board. We're receiving council requests, civilian relay traffic, and surrender notices from 3 surviving Imperial support groups. Kong nodded, but his eyes were not on the numbers. They were on a smaller screen to the side. Haven 12. The latest rescue image had come in only moments ago. The colony was ruined. Parts of the ring still spun in the dark. Fires still burned inside broken sections. Emergency lights flashed weakly through smoke and drifting metal. But now, moving through that destruction, were human rescue craft, human recovery teams, human med crews. Not enough to erase what had happened, but enough to say this: Earth had come. Haru saw where Kong was looking. His voice softened. "We reached them." Kong answered without turning. Too late for many. No one tried to argue with that. Some truths could not be made lighter. In the detention section of the captured Imperial flagship, Grand Admiral Terran sat in silence behind a restraint field. He had not asked for food. He had not asked for treatment. He had not spoken since the moment he was taken from the bridge. He no longer looked like the commander who had come to teach humanity fear. He looked like a man forced to live long enough to understand what he had done. Across the wider galaxy, the shock kept spreading. Council worlds replayed the battle recordings again and again. The same feeds that had once shown the Empire mocking Earth now showed Imperial warships breaking under human precision. Neutral systems that had stayed quiet for years began issuing statements of concern, then caution, then respect. Frontier colonies that had lived under Imperial pressure sent private messages to human channels asking if the stories were true. Was Earth really that strong? Had humans really hidden all of this for so long? The answer now was impossible to deny. Yes. In the Imperial Citadel, Emperor Varric met with his surviving high command in chambers that no longer felt secure. Reports filled the walls: lost fleets, captured officers, shaken border commands, civilian unrest, council pressure, and one hard fact standing above all of it: if the Empire attacked again too quickly,
Earth would answer, and now everyone believed it. Virik hated that truth, but he understood it. Pride could still speak, pride could still posture, pride could still make promises in private rooms, but pride could not rebuild Terran's fleet. Pride could not erase the recordings. Pride could not make the galaxy laugh at Earth anymore. Hours later, the answer finally came. A secure Imperial transmission reached the Resolute under full seal. Un checked the codes twice before opening it. Confirmed from the Citadel, high authority. Put it through, Kong said. Virik appeared again, but this time the difference was clear. He still looked proud, he still looked cold, but he no longer looked certain. The Empire, he said carefully, will withdraw all active strike elements from human border zones. A formal negotiation channel will be opened through neutral observers. All further actions against human civilian colonies are suspended. Suspended. Not apologized for, not admitted, but stopped. It was not justice, not yet, but it was the first thing that mattered most. The killing would stop. Kong looked at him for a long moment. You will deliver the officers responsible. Virik's face hardened. Negotiations will decide. Kong cut across him, not loudly, but with such firmness that even the Imperial aides behind Virik went still. No, he said. Truth will decide. Your officers murdered civilians. This is not a trade dispute. This is not a border error. This is blood. The words stayed hanging in the channel. Virik said nothing for several seconds. Then, at last, he gave the smallest nod. It was not humility. It was something colder. Acceptance. The channel will remain open, he said. Then the transmission ended. No victory cries followed. No cheers broke out on the bridge. The human officers remained at their stations, tired and steady, and carrying the weight of everything they had just seen. Bora exhaled slowly. So that's it? Kong looked at the broken battlefield, the rescue routes, the surrender markers, and the distant signals from Haven 12. No, he said quietly, that's the beginning of what comes after. And that was the truth. Because wars did not end when guns went silent. They ended when the living decided what kind of future the dead had paid for. In the days that followed, the human fleet stayed in formation across the border lanes, while rescue and recovery operations continued. Aid ships moved to damaged colonies, defense grids were rebuilt, survivor names from Haven 12 were recorded one by one, not lost in numbers, not buried in official language, remembered. On Earth, people gathered in homes, public squares, orbital stations, and colony shelters to watch the reports. Some cried, some stood in silence, some held each other and said nothing at all. Humanity had shown its hidden strength, yes, but it had not done so for pride. It had done so because children died while the galaxy laughed. Ambassador Ju returned to the council chamber days later. This time, no one mocked her, no one smiled, no one asked where Earth's warships were. They had seen the answer. She stood in the same place where Virik once insulted humanity and looked across the chamber with steady eyes. Earth still wants peace, she said, but let the record remain clear. Peace is not weakness, patience is not fear, and silence does not mean we are unarmed. No one challenged her, because the galaxy had learned the lesson in fire. Far beyond the council, the hidden human fleet remained real, waiting in the dark, no longer just rumor or legend. It was now part of the balance of the stars, a force not built to conquer, but to make sure no one would ever again mistake kindness for helplessness. On the bridge of the Resolute, after the rescue lanes were secured and the last battle report was filed, Kong finally allowed himself one quiet moment. He stood alone, looking out at the stars. Somewhere among them were the dead of Haven 12. Somewhere among them were the living who were saved. And somewhere beyond them, the future had changed. Haru entered quietly and stopped at a respectful distance away. The fleet is ready for your final command, sir. Kong kept his eyes on the stars a little longer. Then he spoke the words that carried both victory and grief. Bring them home. Across the void, engines turned. The human warships began to move, not as conquerors, not as butchers, but as guardians returning from the day the galaxy finally understood them. And from that day on, no empire, no council, and no world ever laughed at Earth the same way again, because they had all learned one lasting truth. Humanity had hidden its strength not because it was weak, but because it had hoped it would never need to use it. And when that hope was broken, the stars themselves had watched Earth rise, answer the fire, protect its own, and change the balance of the galaxy forever. This was the day the Empire lost more than ships. It lost the right to underestimate humanity. May this message strengthen your faith and renew your hope. Thank you for staying until the end. If this touched your heart, like, share, and subscribe to Astro Realms for more uplifting content. May God's blessings overflow in your life. See you soon.